March 9th, 2026, 2:14 a.m. local time, somewhere over the Norwegian Sea, 300 miles north of the Faroe Islands. A Norwegian P-8A, Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft is flying a routine surveillance pattern. Altitude, 25,000 feet. The aircraft belongs to 333 Squadron, based out of Andoya. Its crew has been airborne for 6 hours, monitoring the waters that separate NATO's northern flank from the Russian Arctic. Tonight, the ocean is supposed to be quiet. It isn't. The acoustic operator in the back of the aircraft picks up a faint tonal, a narrowband contact barely above ambient noise. He adjusts his filters, runs the signal through the onboard classification library, and freezes. The frequency matches a known acoustic signature, a Yasen-M class nuclear-powered guided missile submarine, Russia's most advanced undersea platform, and it's heading southwest, directly toward the Denmark Strait. Within 20 minutes, the contact report reaches NATO's Maritime Command in Northwood, United Kingdom. Within an hour, it's on the desk of the commander of U.S. Submarine Forces Atlantic. Within 2 hours, the National Security Council is briefed. The submarine's projected course leads to one place, Greenland, and the timing is no coincidence. I'm your host at Navy Axis, where we break down the most critical naval operations shaping global power. Today, we're tracking a single Russian submarine and why it may have been the most strategically significant naval deployment of 2026. Because while the world was watching the Persian Gulf, Moscow was playing a different game entirely, a game of diversion, coercion, and calculated risk, and it nearly worked. To understand what happened in the North Atlantic, you have to understand what was happening 6,000 miles to the south. By the second week of March 2026, the United States had 2 carrier strike groups committed to operations against Iran. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower was operating in the Gulf of Oman. The USS Harry S. Truman was positioned in the Red Sea, conducting air operations over Yemen in response to escalating Houthi attacks on commercial shipping. Both carrier strike groups had been on station for weeks. Sortie rates were high, munition expenditures were significant, and the logistics chain was stretched thin. The Atlantic Fleet had one remaining carrier available for European operations, the USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, the most advanced warship ever built, 100,000 tons of sovereign American territory, carrying over 75 aircraft and 4,500 crew. Ford had been conducting NATO exercise Nordic Shield in the Norwegian Sea since late February. The exercise was designed to demonstrate alliance cohesion, but everyone in Norfolk knew the truth. Ford was there because of the GIUK gap, the Greenland-Iceland-United Kingdom gap, the most strategically significant choke point in the North Atlantic. Every Russian submarine transiting from the Northern Fleet bases on the Kola Peninsula to the open Atlantic must pass through it. During the Cold War, NATO spent billions building an underwater detection network, the SOSUS array, to monitor this passage. In 2026, the game hasn't changed. Only the players have. Russia's newest submarine, the Arkhangelsk, had departed Gadzhiyevo Naval Base on March 3rd. Gadzhiyevo is home to the Northern Fleet's submarine force. It sits on the Kola Peninsula, 40 miles north of Murmansk, facing the Barents Sea. When a submarine leaves Gadzhiyevo, NATO watches. But Arkhangelsk was different. The Yasen-M class represents the pinnacle of Russian submarine design, displacing 13,800 tons submerged, stretching 140 meters in length, powered by a single KTP-6 pressurized water reactor driving a pump jet propulsor. That last detail matters. Pump jet propulsion is significantly quieter than traditional propellers. It makes the Yasen-M the hardest Russian submarine to detect. Arkhangelsk carried a weapons loadout that would make any NATO commander lose sleep. 10 torpedo tubes, 40 cruise missiles and vertical launch cells. Those missiles could be Kaliber variants, with a range of up to 2,500 kilometers, or the far more terrifying Zircon hypersonic anti-ship missile capable of reaching Mach 8. A single Yasen-M represents a credible threat to anything within a 1,000-mile radius: surface ships, coastal infrastructure, early warning installations, and that was precisely what Moscow was counting on. The Norwegian P-8A tracked the contact for 3 hours before losing it. The Yasen-M dove deep and went quiet. The crew reported the last known position, course, and speed to northward. The assessment: Arkhangelsk was transiting toward the Denmark Strait at approximately 12 knots, running deep, using thermal layers to mask its acoustic signature. The Denmark Strait sits between Greenland and Iceland. It's roughly 300 kilometers wide. The water is cold, deep, and acoustically challenging. Thermohaline layers, boundaries between water masses of different temperature and salinity, create natural sound channels that a skilled submarine commander can exploit to become virtually invisible. NATO had assets in the area. A U.S. Navy surtask vessel, the USNS Impeccable, was operating its towed sonar array south of Iceland. The UK Royal Navy had the frigate HMS Westminster conducting patrol operations near the Faroe Islands, and the US had two P-8A Poseidons staged out of Pituffik, Iceland, ready for rapid deployment. But finding a quiet submarine in the Denmark Strait is not like finding a ship on open water. It's more like finding a whisper in a thunderstorm. Declassified operational summaries later revealed that NATO lost contact with Arkhangelsk for a total of 47 hours during the transit. 47 hours in which a cruise missile submarine was somewhere in the North Atlantic heading toward Greenland, and nobody could say exactly where. At NATO headquarters in Brussels, the strategic implications were immediate and alarming. Greenland isn't just an island, it's a strategic fortress. At the northwestern tip, at a place called Pituffik, sits a military installation that the United States has operated since 1951. Pituffik Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base. Pituffik hosts the AN/FPS-132 upgraded early warning radar. This is a phased array ballistic missile detection system. It stares out into the polar sky, scanning for the infrared signatures of intercontinental ballistic missiles launched from Russia or China. It provides approximately 25 minutes of warning time for a nuclear strike against the continental United States. 25 minutes. That's the difference between a retaliatory strike and annihilation. If a Yasen-M carrying Zircon hypersonic missiles positions itself within 500 kilometers of Pituffik, it can strike the radar installation with a flight time of roughly 4 minutes. At Mach 8, there is essentially no defensive response window. The radar goes blind. The United States loses its northern early warning capability. This had never happened before. During the Cold War, Soviet submarines operated in the Gdzhiyevo Gap regularly, but they never pushed west of Iceland toward Greenland with this kind of aggressive posture. The Kremlin was sending a message that went beyond routine saber rattling. The effect was calculated and immediate. On March 11th, the USS Gerald R received new orders from Commander, U.S. Fleet Forces Command in Norfolk. The Ford Strike Group was to suspend its participation in Nordic Shield and reposition to cover the Denmark Strait. Specifically, Ford was to establish a patrol zone south of Greenland's eastern coast, within helicopter range of the projected submarine operating area. The order carried an unspoken implication. Ford was not going anywhere else. Not to the Mediterranean, not to the Gulf, not to reinforce CENTCOM operations against Iran. A single Russian submarine had pinned down America's most advanced aircraft carrier without firing a single weapon. If you're following this operation and want to see how the Navy responds to strategic threats like this, hit subscribe and stay locked in. Rear Admiral Patricia Langford commanded the Ford Carrier Strike Group. Sources familiar with the operation described her reaction to the new orders as controlled frustration. Langford understood the strategic math. She also understood what it cost. The Ford Strike Group consisted of the carrier herself, the cruiser USS Gettysburg armed with 122 vertical launch cells, the destroyers USS Ramage, USS Gravely, and USS Thomas Hudner, and the fast attack submarine USS Montana, a Virginia-class Block 4. Combined, the group represented roughly $25 billion in military hardware and over 7,000 personnel, all of it now dedicated to hunting one submarine. Langford ordered an immediate anti-submarine warfare posture. MH-60R. Seahawk helicopters began flying continuous rotations, dipping sonar buoys into the Denmark Strait. The P-8As out of Pituffik intensified their patrols, dropping patterns of sonobuoys, both passive and active, across the projected transit corridor. USS Montana was the tip of the spear. The Virginia-class submarine displaces 7,800 tons submerged and carries the most advanced sonar suite in the U.S. Navy. The BQQ-10 bow-mounted spherical array can detect contacts at extreme range. The TB-29A thin-line towed array extends Montana's acoustic reach even further, trailing behind the submarine like an underwater listening post hundreds of meters long. Montana's commanding officer, Commander James Kelly, positioned his boat in the deep water east of Greenland's continental shelf. The strategy was classic barrier patrol. Establish a sonar screen across the submarine's most likely approach corridor and wait. The waiting was the hard part. For 3 days, Montana listened. The sonar operators worked in shifts, their screens glowing green in the darkened control room, headphones pressed tight, filtering through the ocean's ambient noise, whale calls, distant shipping, the creak of Arctic ice, and somewhere in that noise, a Russian submarine. On March 13th at 9:22 p.m., Montana's towed array picked up a transient, a mechanical sound lasting less than 2 seconds, a pump cycling, or a valve actuating, something that didn't belong to the natural ocean. The bearing pointed northwest, toward Greenland. Commander Kelly ordered a course change. Montana turned slowly to port, bringing the towed array to a more favorable geometry. The operators refined the bearing, then waited for a second detection. It came 40 minutes later, a faint broadband increase on the same bearing, consistent with a submarine at slow speed, roughly 4 knots, running deep. Montana had regained contact with Arkhangelsk. Kelly reported the detection to the Ford Strike Group via extremely low-frequency communication. The information propagated up the chain, to Northwood, to Norfolk, to the Pentagon. For the first time in days, NATO knew where the Russian submarine was. But knowing where it was and doing something about it were two different problems entirely. In the North Atlantic, you don't shoot at submarines during peacetime. You shadow them. You let them know you're there, or you don't. Both options send messages. Langford chose the second option. She ordered Montana to maintain passive tracking. No active sonar, no close approaches. Let the Russians wonder whether they'd been detected or not. The uncertainty itself was a weapon. Meanwhile, the P-8As shifted their sonobuoy patterns to bracket the submarine's detected position. They laid a field of passive DFAR buoys, directional acoustic receivers that relay data back to the aircraft in real time, creating a moving surveillance net that the Arkhangelsk would have to pass through. For 5 days, this underwater chess match continued. Montana tracking, Arkhangelsk creeping, both submarines operating in near silence, separated by anywhere from 15 to 40 nautical miles, their crews living in a state of constant quiet tension. Communications intercepts from Russian Northern Fleet headquarters, collected by NSA listening stations in Greenland and Norway, revealed that Moscow was tracking the Ford Strike Group via satellite. The Russians knew Ford had repositioned. They knew their gambit was working. Every day that Ford sat in the Denmark Strait was a day it wasn't available for operations against Iran, and in the Persian Gulf, the absence was felt. CENTCOM had requested additional carrier aviation support for strikes against Iranian fast attack craft bases along the coast. The Eisenhower was flying maximum sorties. The Truman was split between Yemen and Gulf operations. A third carrier would have given CENTCOM overwhelming air superiority and the ability to sustain continuous operations. Instead, that carrier was babysitting a submarine 4,000 miles away. Pentagon planners called it strategic tethering. Russia had used a single submarine, a platform costing approximately $1.5 billion, to neutralize a carrier strike group worth 25 times that amount. The cost-exchange ratio was devastating. Inside the Kremlin, this was considered a success regardless of what happened next. Whether Arkhangelsk returned to port or stayed on station, the mission was accomplished the moment Ford changed course. But Moscow wasn't done. On March 16th, satellite imagery analyzed by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency showed activity at Gadzhiyevo. A second submarine was preparing to deploy. Imagery analysts identified the hull form as another Yasen-M, likely the Perm. which had completed sea trials in late 2025. If a second cruise missile submarine entered the North Atlantic, the equation would change dramatically. One submarine required one barrier patrol. Two submarines operating independently could saturate NATO's detection capacity, forcing a choice between tracking threats and maintaining other commitments. The intelligence was briefed to the National Security Council on the morning of March 17th. The discussion, according to sources who attended, was tense. The Secretary of Defense argued for deploying additional attack submarines from Norfolk. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs warned that pulling fast attack boats from other theaters would create vulnerabilities in the Pacific. The National Security Advisor asked the question no one wanted to answer. Was Russia preparing for something, or testing whether NATO could handle simultaneous pressure in two theaters? The answer came not from Washington, but from Norway. Norwegian intelligence, Etterretningstjenesten, had been monitoring Russian military communications since the crisis began. On March 18th, they shared a critical intercept with NATO allies. A message from Northern Fleet Command to Arkhangelsk, transmitted via ELF, extremely low frequency, the only communication method that can reach a deeply submerged submarine. The message was short. In translation, maintain station, duration extended, acknowledge. Arkhangelsk was not transiting. It had reached its operating area and was holding position, east of Greenland, within caliber range of Pituffik space base. This changed everything. A submarine in transit is one thing. A submarine on station is another. On station means ready. It means the weapons are loaded, the targeting solutions are computed, and the only thing between the current moment and a missile launch is an order from Moscow. Admiral Thomas Crane, commander of U.S. Naval Forces Europe, convened an emergency video conference with his British and Norwegian counterparts. The decision was made to increase the anti-submarine warfare effort to maximum intensity. The Royal Navy dispatched the submarine HMS Astute from Faslane, Scotland. Astute was Britain's most capable hunter-killer, equipped with the Sonar 2076 suite, considered by many to be the finest submarine sonar system in the world. Astute would transit to the Denmark Strait and establish a secondary tracking line. Norway surged additional P-8A patrols from Andoya, increasing overflight frequency from once daily to 4 times daily over the eastern Greenland operating area, and USS Montana was given new rules of engagement. If Arkhangelsk opened torpedo tube doors or showed any indication of preparing to launch missiles, Montana was authorized to engage immediately without further authorization. Commander Kelly acknowledged the order. In the control room of Montana, the weapons officer verified the targeting solution on Arkhangelsk. 4 Mark 48 advanced capability torpedoes were loaded. Range to target, approximately 22 nautical miles. Time to impact at attack speed, just over 8 minutes. Both submarines sat in the dark Atlantic water, each knowing the other was likely nearby, each waiting for the other to make a mistake. This is the reality of undersea warfare in the 21st century. No explosions, no visible destruction. Just 2 steel cylinders, each carrying enough firepower to reshape a coastline separated by miles of black water, their crews operating in silence for days on end. The pressure isn't physical, it's psychological. Every creak of the hull, every ping of biologics on the sonar display, every slight change in the ocean's thermal structure triggers a cascade of analysis. Is that a whale or a pump? Is that current noise or a propulsor? Montana's crew had been at heightened alert for over a week. Sleep was rationed. Meals were eaten in shifts. Conversation was minimal and whispered. The air recyclers hummed constantly, keeping CO2 levels manageable in the sealed atmosphere. Arkhangelsk's crew was enduring the same. Russian submariners are among the most hardened in the world. Their training is brutal, their deployments long, and their tolerance for discomfort is legendary. But even the most disciplined crew feels the weight of days spent in near-total silence, knowing that an American submarine is somewhere in the water, listening. On March 20th, the situation shifted. Montana's sonar team detected a change in Arkhangelsk's acoustic profile. The Russian submarine was increasing speed from 4 knots to 8, then to 12. The sound signature became clearer, the pump jet propulsor generating more detectable cavitation at higher speed. Arkhangelsk was turning east, away from Greenland, heading back toward the Norwegian Sea. Commander Kelly reported the course change immediately. Within hours, the P-8As confirmed it. Arkhangelsk was withdrawing. The second submarine, Perm, never deployed. Satellite imagery showed it returning to its berth at Gadzhiyevo on March 22nd. The crisis, if it could be called that, was over. No shots fired, no casualties, no dramatic confrontation. Just 2 weeks of silent maneuvering in freezing water that reshaped NATO's strategic calculus. Declassified assessments released weeks later painted a clear picture of what had happened. Russia had executed a textbook strategic distraction operation. By deploying a single high-value submarine toward a critical American installation during a period of maximum U.S. commitment elsewhere, Moscow achieved several objectives simultaneously. First, it demonstrated the ability to threaten Pituffik Space Base, America's northern early warning eye. This had never been done with a cruise missile platform before. The message was unmistakable. In a conflict, this radar goes dark in the first hour. Second, it pinned down the Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group for nearly 2 weeks, preventing its redeployment to support operations in the Persian Gulf. The cost to Russia was the operational expense of a single submarine patrol. The cost to the United States was the combat effectiveness of a $13 billion carrier. Third, it tested NATO's ability to detect and track the Yasen-M in realistic operational conditions. Russian naval intelligence would have been closely monitoring NATO's response, noting patrol patterns, sonobuoy deployment tactics, and communication frequencies. Every piece of intelligence gathered during this operation would inform future deployments. The strategic implications extended beyond the immediate crisis. NATO defense planners were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The alliance lacked sufficient anti-submarine warfare assets to simultaneously cover the GIUK gap and support major operations in another theater. During the Cold War, NATO maintained dozens of frigates, destroyers, and patrol aircraft dedicated to Atlantic ASW operations. By 2026, those numbers had shrunk dramatically. The U.S. Navy's surface fleet had declined from nearly 600 ships in the late 1980s to fewer than 300. Anti-submarine frigates had been retired without replacement. The P-8A force was capable, but stretched thin across global commitments. One Russian submarine had exposed all of this. Admiral Crane, in a classified briefing to NATO's North Atlantic Council, described the Arkhangelsk deployment as the most significant Russian undersea provocation since the end of the Cold War. He recommended immediate investment in additional ASW capabilities. More submarines, more patrol aircraft, more undersea sensor networks. Whether those recommendations would be acted upon remained an open question. Defense budgets are slow to change. Threat perceptions shift with each news cycle. And the public never heard about the silent standoff east of Greenland. But in the operations centers and submarine wardrooms of NATO navies, the lesson was absorbed. Russia had demonstrated that it could hold American strategic infrastructure at risk with a single platform, that it could fix major U.S. naval assets in place through presence alone, and that in a world where the United States faces simultaneous challenges across multiple theaters, the math doesn't always add up. The Ford eventually returned to its exercise schedule on March 25th. Montana was relieved on station by USS North Carolina and headed to Faslane for crew rest. Arkhangelsk returned to Gadzhiyevo, where it presumably began preparations for its next deployment. The ocean went quiet again. But quiet doesn't mean safe. It means the next move hasn't been made yet. Comment: Deep 6 if you think NATO needs to reinvest in Atlantic submarine defense, and if this operation opened your eyes to the strategic game being played beneath the surface, subscribe, because the next confrontation is already being planned, in Moscow, in Norfolk, and in the cold black water between them.